Now, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on foreign direct investment in Africa, as flows to the continent declined by 16% in 2020. Now, a report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development shows that commodity-dependent economies were affected more severely than non-resource-based economies. FDI inflows to North Africa contracted by 25% to $10 billion. That's down from $14 billion in 2019. And FDI inflows to sub-Saharan Africa decreased by 12% to $30 billion, while Southern African nations reported a 16% decline to $4.3 billion. Now, in East Africa, FDI dropped to $6.5 billion. That's a 16% decline from 2019. There was, however, some good news on the continent, with investment growing in a few nations. Senegal received higher inflows in 2020 with a 39% increase to $1.5 billion. And that, of course, was largely due to investments in its energy sector. And finally, Central Africa was the only region in Africa that registered an increase in foreign direct investment in 2020. We saw inflows of $9.2 billion. That's compared with $8.9 billion in 2019. Well, let's now delve further into that report. We're joined by Michael Sudarkase. He is the CEO of Africa Business Group. Great to have you with us on today's show, sir. Now, overall, looking at those numbers, it does come as no surprise that investment inflows into Africa fell last year, of course, given the coronavirus pandemic. But looking closer at those numbers, Central Africa, as we mentioned, registered an increase in FDIs. We saw investment in SDGs falling last year. Nigeria also seeing just a slight increase in inflows. So looking at them, is there anything that surprised you in this report? What were your thoughts on those numbers?
I think the thing that stuck out was good evening and good afternoon, depending upon where you are. That stuck out for me was the fact that Central Africa had such a positive inflow of FDI compared to the other regions of the continent. But it's not really that surprising, given the fact that Africa leads in terms of its export markets with its natural resources, and the places where one typically sells those natural resources were hard hit by COVID. So when you're not selling to China initially, you're not selling to the United States, that has a knock-on effect from an export standpoint, and also those are sources of capital where those nations weren't investing. So all in all, and again, it's 16% is nothing to be happy about, but it could have been much worse. And so in that regard, I think the continent is actually poised well for a rebound.
Now, the report also says that projections for 2021 remain pretty weak when we talk about an investment recovery. But despite those projections, they also point to a few factors that could fuel a rebound going forward. For example, a rebound in the demand for commodities. Are you optimistic when you look at some of these factors that the continent is firmly heading in that direction?
I think so. I mean, the continent is likely to trade sideways from an FDI standpoint, but is poised for growth. And why do I say that? One, there's a lot of interest in positioning for the African Continental Free Trade Area. There's also, as the rest of the world opens up, and I would say there's a direct correlation between access to vaccine and the really opening up of the market. So as North America seems to have beaten back COVID, Europe is moving in that direction. As those parts of the world, again, their economies start to thrive, they will buy again from the continent. They will be interested in investing in the continent. Again, we're on this trajectory to have Africa become a $2.5 billion person economy in the next 30 years. So that hasn't changed, even with COVID. And so there's still likely to be another scramble, if you will, to have a stake on the continent. And why do I say that? because when the Continental Free Trade Area is really formalized and humming, companies from off the continent will want to have a footprint on the continent to take advantage of the large market that will exist. So COVID was definitely something that impacted the continent, but when you think about the human toll, the human capital toll, the continent did not lose as many people as many other parts of the world. So the economies are still fairly intact. So they're poised for a rebound. It just meant that the investing countries from around the world took big hits because of COVID. And as they come back, as those countries get vaccinated, they'll look back at the continent and invest.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. You pointed to it earlier. When we talk about a rebound in the shorter term, and of course mentioned the impending finalization of that free trade area agreement as a key factor in FDI picking up momentum by 2022, are you confident about the progress made so far? Are we any closer to seeing this agreement reaping any major benefits for the continent?
Well, we're still dealing with the throes on the continent of COVID. So, I think we have less than 2% of the continent have been vaccinated. So that really is an impediment to trade flows from an intra-African trade standpoint. That said, you have three countries who continue to invest around the continent: Nigeria. Access Bank just recently invested in South Africa, which is Nigeria's leading bank. You have Kenya expanding in East Africa, and you have South Africa expanding from the southern point of the continent, and Egypt. So these are countries that are also playing a key role from a standpoint of FDI on the continent, and they will continue to do so. And the Continental Free Trade Area really just accelerates that process, because now your economies of scale are much larger. And so you're now looking to say, where can I be best placed? And now I can serve the entire continent. And so the steps, you still have non-tariff barriers that have to be addressed. You still have regional economic communities that are working to harmonize their regulations and their policies. But that has gotten a boost from the passage in January, the launch in January of the Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Well, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. That was, of course, Michael Sudar Kassa, the CEO of Africa Business Group.